Hey y'all, and welcome to another video. This one's going to be a little bit different because I will be previewing the 2022 Senate elections in this video. The Senate is currently 50-50 when you include the fact that Bernie Sanders and Angus King are caucusing with the Democrats. Uh, the map leans Democrat. It looks good for Democrats, but it will likely be a red wave year. So the Senate is definitely going to be very interesting to keep an eye on over the next 2 years. And even not so long ago, we found out that Ohio Senator Rob Portman will be retiring. And I thought it would be a great time to make a video like this. So I want to get started by showing you the blank map. These are the 34 seats that will have Senate battles in 2022. So I'm going to start by filling in the safe red and blue states where it just seems like no matter what possibly happens, there's no way that this seat could flip. So first off, we got Richard Shelby in Alabama. We got Lisa Murkowski in Alaska because she's so moderate that even a Democrat challenging her would probably not do too well. You got John Boozman in Arkansas, one of the reddest states in the country. Alex Padilla in California. Richard Blumenthal in Connecticut. Brian Schatz running for re-election in Hawaii. Hawaii is probably the bluest state in all of America. Mike Crapo is running for re-election in Idaho. Rand Paul in Kentucky. Jerry Moran in Kansas. You got John Kennedy in Louisiana. John N. Kennedy, not F. You got John Hoeven running for re-election in North Dakota. He's safe. Charlie Schumer in New York is safe. Langford of Oklahoma, Senator Wyden of Oregon, Mike Lee of Utah, and then Senator Patricia Murray of Washington. These are all the safe senators. So when you fill in the safe seats, you got 42 Democrats and 40 Republicans. These are all the states where no matter what happens, there's no way that one party will lose. And I forgot to include Roy Blunt of Missouri. And of course, Illinois. Tammy Duckworth. So yeah, these are your safe states, and then of course Indiana as well. All right, so 43-42 is what it looks like in reality. Now I want to look at my situationally likely states. So these are states that will only be competitive if a certain candidate runs or if a certain situation happens. For example, my first situationally likely state is going to be Maryland, because Maryland is a very deep blue state. But if Governor Hogan decided to run against Democratic incumbent Chris Van Hollen, he would probably have a good chance. I would say South Dakota is situationally likely because if Billy Sutton were to run again, he would have a chance of potentially flipping that seat. Billy Sutton won, I believe, 48% of the vote in 2018. So he did very well in a deep red state of putting together a bipartisan coalition and winning a lot of those counties that you wouldn't expect a Democrat to win in South Dakota. Moving on, Vermont is likely Democrat because, yes, Vermont is definitely a blue state. But if Pat Leahy is challenged by Republican Governor Phil Scott, he would probably have a chance. Here's what the map looks like when I fill in the actual likely states. So South Carolina, I would call likely, not situationally, but just regular likely state. In 2018, James Smith won 46% of the vote. Joe Cunningham might run. He's out of the House. So we'll see. It could be close. Will Democrats actually flip the seat? Probably not. But could it be competitive and possibly more competitive than 2020? Yes. There are a lot of Black voters in the state. The suburbs of Charleston and Columbia are changing, but Democrats have to do better on the I-85 corridor, especially in Greenville and Spartanburg, if they want to have a chance, and in rural white South Carolina, where they really have trouble attracting voters. All right, now I'm going to move on to the leaning states. My first leaning state is Florida. No, I don't think Florida is a lost cause for the Democrats, especially if maybe a Val Demings were to run for the seat. I think she would have a good chance. She got a lot of attention during the vice president nomination process. And I think she would be a strong enough candidate to beat Marco Rubio. Of course, Marco Rubio will probably do well with the Cuban Americans that Trump did so well with in 2020. But Florida remains close and still did vote 62% in favor of increasing the minimum wage. So, in a 2020 referendum. And they did also vote for giving convicted felons the right to vote in 2018. So, the Republican Party does well in Florida, but a lot of Democratic policies do well. If Democrats focus on policy, they might do better in Florida. Looking at Iowa, I would also call this one leaning Republican. Yes, Iowa has been pretty Trumpian, pretty pro-Trump over the past 4 years, but we don't know how Iowa will look in a post-Trump landscape. Also, we saw Democrat Fred Hubbell come close in 2018 to winning the governor's seat. Also, when you look at who the incumbent senator is in Iowa, it's Chuck Grassley. He's 87. He'll be 89 on election day. That means he's running for a term that would expire when he's 95. 95 years old is pretty old. So I expect Grassley to retire. Maybe he won't, but I expect for Iowa to be an open seat race where you don't have a Republican incumbent. Could make it a little bit easier for Democrats to flip the seat. And then finally, I would go with Nevada. I would call this a leading Democrat state. Democrats have found ways to barely win Nevada in 2016, 2018, and 2020. Of course, it really comes down to those suburbs, especially in Clark and Washoe counties. Democrats have managed to put together the winning coalition time after time after time, but it's always been fragile. Or not fragile, but it's always been a very small margin of victory for the Democrats over the past few years. So I wouldn't be shocked if there's a big red wave year in 2022 if Democrats lost Nevada. Next up, I would go with New Hampshire. New Hampshire is leaning Democrat, especially because not only is it a swing state, but if Governor Sununu decides to run for the seat, he's very popular among New Hampshire voters. So he would have a good chance of flipping that seat. So I'll definitely be watching for whether or not Sununu joins that race there in New Hampshire. Next up, I would say Ohio. Ohio's Senate race has gotten a lot of attention over the past few days because of Rob Portman's retirement. You might get a Tim Ryan jumping into that race. I've heard talk about potentially the former health commissioner, I believe, running for the Democrats. This will likely be your typical open seat race where Democrats think they can flip it. It's been tough for Democrats in Ohio over the past few cycles, but we'll see what happens. Next up, I want to fill in the tilt states. That's my final classification other than toss-up. Arizona. This is a tilt Democratic state. Republicans have just struggled in Arizona lately, but it's close. Even Governor Ducey, who cruised to victory in 2018, has seen his approval ratings fall sharply. Even in a red wave year, I could still see Arizona voting Democrat, but red wave might mean that Republicans who crossed the line for Senator Sinema and Kelly could go back to their party in a post-Trump environment. We don't know. But Arizona certainly was a big story in 2018 and 2020. And I think it'll be a very interesting race to keep a close eye on. Yeah. And those suburbs of Maricopa County will have a big impact no matter what happens in the Arizona Senate race. Next up, I will go with Georgia. Raphael Warnock is the Democrat who would be defending his seat. He will likely share a ballot with Stacey Abrams. His approval rating in the January 2020 AJC poll was, I believe, 54%, which is pretty good in a slightly red state like Georgia. Black turnout in the Atlanta suburbs, as well as um, the white suburban counties like Gwinnett and Cobb, could play a big role in whether or not Warnock is able to win re-election. And then finally, I forgot Colorado. Colorado is likely Democrat. Maybe in a red wave, Republicans could flip it, but I highly doubt it. And then finally, we're left with my three toss-ups: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. North Carolina will be very interesting, especially if maybe Roy Cooper were to jump in on the Democratic side. We just learned that Jeff Jackson joined that race, and Erica Smith is also expected to run. And on the Republican side, we could see former Congressman Mark Walker. We could see Dan Forrest, Pat McCrory, or maybe even Laura Trump run as a candidate in that race. So North Carolina will be very interesting. 2020 was really close. Democrats still won, the governor's race, the Secretary of State race, the Attorney General race. They were able to find success. Next up is Wisconsin. Wisconsin is where Senator Ron Johnson will be up for re-election. He barely won re-election in 2016, riding the coattails of Donald Trump. 2022 will likely be tougher than that. 2020, Wisconsin was still extremely close, but Ron Johnson has not been, the most pragmatic of the senators. He was one of the senators who objected to the election results. I don't know if this will be relevant in 2022 or not, but he certainly hasn't done much to position himself into the center rather than the right or the right wing of the party. That might hurt him. So that's why I have Wisconsin as a toss-up, because Ron Johnson has not really built a case for why he represents all Wisconsin voters and independents and centrists, but it could be a red wave year. So we'll see what happens. And finally, we got Pennsylvania. Senator Pat Toomey won re-election in 2016 by less than 2%. This time he won't be running for re-election. And rumor has it that Democratic Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, one of the rising stars of the party, will be running for the seat. So definitely Fetterman is running to replace Toomey in an open seat election. It could be very, very interesting. So Pennsylvania is definitely a state to watch. And just coming into these 2022 elections, the three big states to watch for the Senate races will be Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. But also don't take your eyes off of Georgia and Arizona. So that kind of concludes this video. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you want more preview videos like this. I can make one about the governor's races in 2022.